there, welcome to my channel. I am Wandering Ananda, and this is the story of my journey car camping with my cat in one of the smallest SUVs ever made, a 2000 Toyota RAV4, which is smaller than the newer model. So back in Joshua Tree South, I had to move for what ended up being my last night there because someone set up a huge speaker pretty close to where I was camped. It was the week of Coachella, so I imagined the worst, and I picked up and moved to the west part of Joshua Tree South, which was not too far away, but far enough that any loud music would be in the distance. The next day, I drove through Joshua Tree National Park, since it was the same distance as going around it, and I had an annual pass that was set to expire in the summer that covered the $30 entrance fee. The drive through the park was pleasant, but it was full of tourists despite the heat, and because it was so hot in the middle of the day and I had my cat in the car, I didn't stop. But I did take some photos and video along the way. I resupplied our food and water and attempted to find Big Rock, which is nearby BLM land to camp on, but it was the first of many GPS errors that led me down the wrong road. Although I think even the right road may not have helped me in this instance, because in addition to miles of washboard dirt road, the Big Rock, which I never got to, was really out in the middle of nowhere. And fearing that I might be stuck out there without anyone around, I turned around and headed toward Joshua Tree to camp for at least the night. But little did I realize there was going to be a high wind dust storm and my first safety scare. Actually, my first safety scare happened in Joshua Tree South from the neighbor that I was parked near. But he just drove past on his way back from errands and said, "Hey neighbor," and offered me water or firewood, which I declined, and he said I could come by if I needed anything. I was a little uncomfortable, especially being so close and it being like my second night there, but I chose not to panic because I reminded myself that most people are decent and that he was just being friendly. I felt secure in my locked vehicle overnight, but dreaded leaving it past dark to use the bathroom and had already peed on myself in the car. I've since trained myself not to have to pee in the middle of the night, which has so far been a success. In Joshua Tree South, the high wind and dust storm was so severe that I couldn't possibly pack up and leave or drive through it to who knows where. But most of the other campers left, and I wondered if I was crazy to stay, but I had nowhere to go and no way of driving around it, so I decided to stay put. At around 7 p.m., someone rolled right up to my car and asked if I needed anything, if I had gas, water, etc. I said we were all set, thank you. I made sure to be confident and nice, even though I was creeped out for the next couple of hours. And I reminded myself that most people are decent, and that while most of the other campers had left camp and I was out in the middle of the dry lake by myself, I planned different scenarios of what was the worst that could happen and fully prepared to drive off and leave my tent. There were other campers within driving distance, and I had full cell service, so I felt safe-ish. I won't say that I rested easy, but I did manage to get a full night of sleep thanks to sleep aids. The next morning, I was just happy to be alive. So as everything was covered in dust, I was full of gratitude and glad I chose not to be fearful and followed my instincts that I would be just fine. Overall, Joshua Tree North was a disappointment after Joshua Tree South. Maybe it's because I mistakenly set up in the middle of the dry lake rather than around the perimeter like everyone else, or in what appeared to be in the main camping area, which was a little too close to other campers for my comfort. After my safety scare, I regretted that decision, but most people had cleared out by then anyway. In Joshua Tree North, I could hear the gun range, and there were no trees to break any gusts of wind or dust. It was quieter without the highway noise that was in Joshua Tree South, and I could see the light from the homes in the hills, so it wasn't as dark. To me, it just wasn't as scenic, so I planned on heading back to Joshua Tree South because I still had plenty of time left after my next supply run, but I decided not to drive through the park again. More about that trip later. I regret not doing more camping as an adult, but I was preoccupied with trying to get established and plan routes. Ultimately, it was wasted time and effort. Sometimes I wonder if this is the lifestyle I meant to have many years ago, from when I almost dropped out of college to live in a van with some people I met at a concert, which I ultimately decided was a bad idea, or when I first looked into buying an old RV before living in a travel trailer near the beach for 2 years over a decade ago. Flash forward to learning that van life hit mainstream and starting to look for a truck camper back in 2018. Anyway, at this point of my journey, I had just started getting proper sleep and was hoping to get a remote job But to try and work on a deadline was difficult even in an apartment. I'm hoping to earn at least something from these videos, but I need your help. So please subscribe and hit the like and notification buttons, and feel free to share these videos with others who you think might be interested. So after a 3-hour errand run through a windy, dusty Palm Springs, which I prefer over Indio, I returned to the south end of BLM land at Joshua Tree National Park for my second week. By the way, not to be confused with the town called Joshua Tree, which is actually north of Joshua Tree National Park. So I went all the way to Palm Springs so I could pick up an extension cord at an Amazon hub for the solar panel that ended up failing, but more about that later, and to get organic food that ended up spoiling due to said failure. In Palm Springs, it was so windy at the side of my car that I had to slow down to avoid being pushed into the next lane. The dust blowing at the side of my car was audible, like hard rain. Since I took my time to find a new spot, I only had about an hour to set up camp before nightfall, and at this point I hadn't become efficient at transitioning from drive to camp mode, which I can now do in a matter of minutes with my current setup. The first task is usually feeding the cat, followed by getting the window screens up for privacy and shade, and then popping the tent. During the 2 weeks of wind, my tent held up pretty well and only blew over twice. Wrestling with my tent in high wind, especially the folding back up part, makes me feel like a badass, or at least a pro. I have a running dialogue in my head about being so impressed with myself, because in reality I envy self-contained vehicles, especially while boondocking or dry camping, that requires little setup and allow for not having to exit the vehicle for things like using the camp stove or toilet. Even a bear van at this point would be a luxury. I had planned on continuing the hunt for a van while in Joshua Tree and throughout my journey, but I dealt with a lot of fatigue, and most days it was too hot to break out the computer. During my errand run, I was able to charge the Bluetti back to 100%, but the connection to my fridge came loose overnight, so I lost all the food I had just bought for the second time. I had to conserve battery power, and I won't starve since I have plenty of carbs and protein bars, which I've subsisted on since the start of my journey, except for the very first day, which is not great. The 12-volt socket on the Bluetti has simply been unreliable and doesn't properly lock any 12-volt connector. I've tried rubber bands that work like an O-ring. I've tried electrical tape and a few other things to keep it secure, but it's not secure. It just doesn't stay put. The ample sun is great for plenty of solar energy, provided that everything works, but I need to swap out solar panels so I don't have to ration my device usage. Hard panels are more efficient and reliable, but I just don't have the space for even one, not even in my soft carrier. That would be a pain to try to get out every time I needed to use it. And the Bluetti battery lasts a good while, but not as daily use of phone and tablet for more than just a few days. So with only 40%, I've been reading during the day and using my phone less and streaming only an hour of video at night. It's been nice. But I decided that on my way up the coast, I would stop at my storage unit to pick up a few things, drop off a few other things, and especially my dead solar panel. Yep, one day it was working just fine. The next day, complete failure. I did all the troubleshooting, checking connections, cables, and battery, and later en route to LA, I even got a multimeter reader to test it, according to which has 0 output. Join me next time when I decide what to do about my solar panel, leave the desert, and attempt to drive up a gnarly forest road to camp in the San Bernardino forest on my way back to LA. Thanks for watching! Subscribe to follow me on this journey into the desert and beyond as I drive up the coast of California in my tiny SUV.